Good morning, everyone. We're going to give people another minute or two to log in before we get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Nick Angarone with the Climate and Flood Resilience Program at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Thank you for joining us for this virtual stakeholder information session. I appreciate you all taking the time to be here with us as we all learn to efficiently work from home. While we've been forced to adapt our plans for six stakeholder sessions across the state to this one virtual information session, we hope the presentation will provide you with sufficient information to provide feedback on the direction of the state's climate resilience efforts. Similarly, we will provide an online survey for you to provide feedback on specific issues, as well as the opportunity for general input. In hopes that it might make it feel a little more like a normal stakeholder session, we have put the faces of the voices that you'll be hearing from today. My colleagues in the DEP Climate and Flood Resilience Program, Becky Hill, Jessica Jerry, Tommy Cajano, and Vanessa Dornish, will all be speaking with you throughout this session. Some housekeeping items before we get into our content. Throughout the meeting, please use the question and answer function for questions and comments. We'll answer as we can throughout the meeting. When you do comment or ask a question, kindly type in your name and organization so we have context and can follow up as necessary. Please type out any abbreviations that may not be obvious. And yes, this presentation will be shared after the event. So today, it's our hope that this presentation will provide you with an understanding of the direction of the Climate Change Resilience Strategy and Coastal Resilience Plan, and provide you with the context on which to provide your feedback and respond to the survey. We're planning on keeping this to an hour, so let's get to it. We're all here because Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 89 in October of 2019, reinforcing that climate resilience is a statewide priority. The executive order set an ambitious schedule for two major deliverables: a statewide climate change resilience strategy, which includes a coastal resilience plan, and a scientific report on climate change. With the scientific report, we are compiling, reviewing, and analyzing published scientific studies to present information on how climate change impacts New Jersey. In a few minutes, Becky Hill will share some of those findings. The statewide climate change resilience strategy is to be delivered by September 1 and is the primary focus of this webinar. The executive order also established an interagency council on climate resilience made up of 17 state agencies with the direction to inform development of the statewide climate change resilience strategy. And I'll turn it over to Becky now to discuss some key takeaways from the scientific report.
Hi everyone, my name is Becky Hill, as Nick mentioned, and I work in the DEP's Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning. DEP has been developing the scientific report that Nick mentioned, and the purpose is to provide a summary of how New Jersey will be affected by climate change based on the vast amount of scientific literature and data that's available. This is the first time we're putting together a report like this, and it's a crucial step in understanding how we need to respond to climate change. So I'm really excited that we had the opportunity to be involved in developing the report, and I'm very excited to be able to tell you a little bit about it today. As we all know, everyone around the world is being impacted by climate change, but what we really need to know is what to expect in New Jersey. This was the main focus when developing the report. As you all know, New Jersey is a highly developed coastal state where 50% of our population lives in the coastal area and is currently at risk to coastal hazards like sea level rise and storm surge. This risk will only increase as sea levels continue to rise. And sea level rise isn't the only hazard New Jersey needs to be concerned about as our climate changes. We're also at risk to impacts from increases in temperature and precipitation. What's of particular concern is that temperatures and sea levels are rising faster in New Jersey than elsewhere. Because of this, it's even more important that we understand what changes to expect and when they'll occur, because all of these changes will threaten our environments, habitats, and wildlife, and impact our way of life, including our economy and public health. These reasons are why we need to understand what the science says about how New Jersey will be impacted, so we have a strong foundation from which we can begin to respond. So I'm going to give you an overview of some of the key messages that will be included in the report. So let's start with temperature. New Jersey has temperature records back to 1895, and we know our average temperature has already increased by 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. How much our temperature increases from this point forward depends on the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted globally. However, before 2050, the increase in temperature we can expect is about the same regardless of the emission scenario. That's because any increase in temperature we see between now and then is based on past emissions. Looking forward, by 2050, we expect the temperature in New Jersey to increase by 4.1 to 5.7 degrees compared to the end of last century. By 2080, temperatures will increase even more. As you see from the table on the screen, temperatures could increase by almost 10 degrees in as little as 40 years from now. Let's think about that. Imagine the hottest days from last summer and add about 10 degrees on top of that temperature. And this doesn't account for changes in humidity, which we all know can make things feel so much hotter. This means our populations and ecosystems will have to cope with more extreme temperatures more often, and heat waves will impact larger areas more often and for longer periods of time. Also, we can expect increases in temperature to reduce New Jersey's agricultural yields and power plant efficiency, increase energy use, and will have negative effects on people's health. As temperatures rise, we'll also see changes in the precipitation patterns that we're used to. Over the past 10 years, we've already seen changes, and the amount of annual precipitation we received has increased by almost 8%. By 2050, the increase will be 4 to 11% over the average amounts of precipitation from the end of last century. What's really important to know about precipitation is that yes, the amount of precipitation we're going to see over an entire year will increase slightly, but the biggest change we can expect is how we receive that precipitation. We can expect more intense rain events, meaning storms will drop large amounts of rain over shorter periods of time. Some of you may already feel like we're experiencing events just like this, and as you can imagine, more extreme events will mean more changes and more chances of flooding to occur. And between these extreme events, there will be longer periods when it's dry. These dry periods might not technically be droughts, but will impact our communities, crops, and ecosystems in a very similar way. These dry periods will also be more severely felt because they'll occur at the same time as extreme high temperatures. Now on to sea level rise. As I'm sure you're aware, sea level rise is going to greatly impact New Jersey and all its communities, infrastructure, and resources that are located in low-lying coastal areas. As with temperature, how much sea level rise we experience depends on the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted globally. To fully understand sea level rise projections for New Jersey, we asked Rutgers to update the Science and Technical Advisory Panel report, which was done this past October. The table I'm showing is based on data in that report for a moderate emissions scenario. What is expected for New Jersey is that by 2050, it's most likely that we'll experience at least 0.9 to 2.1 feet of sea level rise. By 2070, 1.4 to 3.1 feet is most likely to occur, and by 2100, 2 to 5.2 feet. One way DEP is already using this information is that it's informing development of guidance for how our program should prepare for sea level rise based on the risk tolerance of projects, activities, and assets that we oversee. Sea level rise will impact New Jersey through both storm surges and through sunny day flooding. We can expect to experience more intense storms as temperatures get hotter, and with these storms will come more impactful storm surges that will flood larger areas of land as the base sea levels continue to get higher. But it's not just storm surge that we need to be concerned about. Our coastal communities are already experiencing sunny day flooding. I'm sure many of you have witnessed flooding in roadways and coastal areas when it's a beautiful sunny day and there's no storm clouds in sight. This flooding happens because the ocean level is higher than that roadway or higher than the stormwater outfall and floods the street. As sea levels rise, this type of flooding will occur more often as more of our infrastructure gets overwhelmed. For just one example, we can look to Atlantic City. In 1950, flooding from tides occurred an average of less than once per year. Between 2007 and 2016, Atlantic City experienced an average of 8 occurrences per year. By 2100, there's a 95% chance that Atlantic City will experience sunny day flooding 95 times per year, and a 50% chance it will happen 355 times per year. Hearing these statistics makes it clear why it's so necessary for the state to develop strategies to address not only sea level rise, but the other climate change impacts I've mentioned so far. So what does this all mean for New Jersey? I've mentioned that we'll experience more and longer heat waves and more flooding because of rain events and sea level rise. But I also wanted to take a minute to talk about a few other ways New Jersey will be impacted by the changes in temperature, precipitation, and sea level rise that I just covered. In addition to more heat waves, an increase in temperature may lead to negative health impacts like increases in respiratory and cardiovascular health problems like asthma and hay fever. Increases in sea level rise may result in a loss of wetlands and the important ecological and protective services they provide. As New Jersey habitats are altered, the wildlife that depend on them for food and shelter will also be impacted and will be stressed as they try to adapt. One example is our state bird, the American goldfinch. Because of the conditions that are expected as a result of climate change, our state bird may not be able to survive in areas of the state in the future. It may not be able to adapt. New Jersey will also see changes to other iconic state resources like the production of blueberries and cranberries. Both these crops require a cold winter period to successfully flower and produce fruit, and New Jersey is seeing less and less of these cold periods. This means a reduction in the amount of blueberries and cranberries that are harvested each year. The conditions within our forests and water systems will also change, increasing the conditions under which wildfires can start and harmful algal blooms can form. These are just a few of the impacts New Jersey will experience and only some of the issues the state needs to strive to address. There are many more examples included in the scientific report on climate change. The intent of this overview was to give you an idea of what we're planning to address. So now I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Nick to give you an overview of the state's climate change resilience strategy.
Thanks, Becky. So we'll move into discussion of the strategy, and I'll note that first, what we're presenting here today is conceptual. Your feedback and comments will inform the direction and details of the report. But what is solid is that the strategy will include forward-looking state policies that address some of our vulnerabilities to climate impacts and help us strengthen resilience in New Jersey. Per Executive Order 89, it will contain recommendations for how the state can change its policies, regulations, funding decisions, and operations to enhance resilience. The strategy will be reviewed every 2 years. This first iteration will not be the last, and this initial version cannot have all of the answers. The strategy has 5 goals framed by what our vision for a resilient New Jersey will look like. I won't read them verbatim, but they are an informed state. We want to be proactive. We want to limit exposure. We want healthy ecosystems and strong communities. On the right are some general principles that the state should follow through the development and implementation of this plan and our resiliency policy decisions moving forward. We want our work to be science-based, innovative, equitable, and coordinated while being complementary to the greenhouse gas mitigation goals that the state has set. What you see on the screen here are the categories or strategies representing the core direction of how we're thinking about the climate change resilience strategy. They represent the large umbrella areas that encompass all of the actions and recommendations of the state agencies on the Interagency Council. Each strategy will describe steps we're already taking, as well as future actions that the state could implement to enhance resilience. And they are also how we'll organize the remainder of this presentation. With that, I will turn it over to Jessica, who will walk through the first of these. We're having technical difficulties. Please bear with us.
Sorry, my have I still been muted this whole time?
Yeah, there you go.
I am so sorry, everyone. I am going to, at this point, explain what Start with the Science means in terms of our response to climate change. As Nick said, these strategies are broad umbrellas that encompass a lot of the ongoing efforts that the state is taking, as well as the future efforts that we can take. And the way that we're thinking about the science is that in order to have a foundation for our response to addressing climate change, we need to have a better understanding of how climate change is affecting the state. So what are the data and research that we need to make informed decisions at state, local, and individual levels? What tools do we need to translate that data into information? How do we use that data to understand the impacts of climate change on our resources? And what are the steps to take that information and increase awareness across the state? So this is one of the strategies that we've already taken steps to act on. As Becky went over, we are already looking at how climate change is affecting the state. And we've done so by updating the sea level rise projections that the Rutgers STAP report put out in 2016. So they put out a new one in 2019 at our direction. We've brought together everything into the scientific report. And we've already started to take steps on filling in the the data gaps that were identified, and one of those that was identified through that process is the gaps on understanding how precipitation and inland flooding is going to be changing in the future. So we're already starting to pull together agencies and look at what do we need to know about precipitation and rain events to get a better understanding of our response. But we want to make sure that we're taking this opportunity to ask all of you and make sure that if there are other activities that you know of within the state that are advancing research on climate change or its impacts, that we're aware of those and we can include them in our response. So at this time, I would encourage anybody who is aware of something to enter it into the sidebar or make a note to reach out to one of us after the presentation has ended, just to make sure that we have a full understanding of what's happening in the state. There's a number of current ideas that we have for what we could do going forward. And these, as Nick said, are conceptual. This is just a small list of what potential ideas the state might take. It's not an exhaustive list, and it is not certain that the state's going to take any of the ideas that you hear today and move them forward. So what we're asking for you today in the comment bar and the question and answer bar to please provide your feedback on what you see on these slides. The other should be used as sort of a prompt if you have other ideas. The more specific you can get, the easier it is for us to be able to follow up on that. And as Nick said, there will be a survey after that you can provide more direct feedback. But as you're listening to us, if anything comes up for you, please enter it in the Q&A. So one of the things that we've come up with so far is that we could be providing more GIS data layers in order to, as a state, allow for improved decision making at both our agency level and local and county levels as well. We want to make sure that we're expanding our communication campaigns on climate change, and we want to be investing in research by establishing funding and coordinating the research efforts that moving forward. So those are some of the ideas that we have, and we look forward to some of your thoughts. Tommy? So the second strategy of the 6 that Nick highlighted is plan and design for the future. So once we have an understanding of what climate change, what impacts climate change may have, or what future conditions might look like, how do we start to integrate those into our planning, designing, permitting, and other regulatory decisions? And the way that we are thinking about this is that we want to make sure that we're planning for resilience. We want to be integrating resilience thinking and resilience planning into all of our planning efforts across the state at every level. Resilience is not something that can simply be done in a single plan. In order to be effective, it needs to be integrated in our other planning efforts. How do we use regulation to support resilience efforts and not hinder them? So this is a twofold effort at both updating authorities and regulations to account for future conditions, as well as recognizing that regulations can have had a specific purpose that may now be not appropriate for current or future conditions. So what are those that we need to kind of look at? We want to make sure that we're capitalizing on the innovation and using innovation to maximize co-benefits in recognition that resources are scarce. We want to be trying, for every solution that we apply, we want to be trying to solve 2 problems, 3 problems. How can we make sure that we are being effective and efficient with the small resources that we have? And at the end of the day, we are also trying to make sure that we're reducing risk to critical assets across the state. So these are the general ideas that follow under this larger umbrella, and some of the actions that we're already starting to take is integrating climate change into planning efforts. This was part of EO 89 in looking at plan endorsement and making sure that for those communities that are coming into plan endorsement, that they are examining climate change and future conditions in their local planning efforts. For those that are unfamiliar, we also have a new regulatory effort called NJDEP-Climate, and if you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to look it up on the DEP website, but it is looking at integrating climate change into some of the department's regulations. We're also starting to look at at the state, how do we make asset management decisions? How do we decide about elevations of roadways and future building conditions in order to make sure that we're making wise choices? So these are some of the activities that we are already doing. Again, I would ask that anybody who has other thoughts to enter it into the comment bar. Some of the ideas of what we could do is looking at making sure that we're expanding our current efforts to other regulations that were not articulated in EO 100. We want to make sure that we're fully capitalizing on the opportunity to create innovation and drive innovation within the state. And we want to make sure that we're providing sufficient guidelines and information on how to modify design elements for future conditions. So again, if you have any additional ideas, we welcome them in the comment bar. The third one that I'm going to talk about, the broad umbrella, is making sure that we're supporting local and regional action. While there's a lot that the state can do to support and enhance resilience in New Jersey, with local land use being held at the municipal level and the various capabilities across the state, it really is going to be our municipalities that lead a lot of efforts on addressing climate resilience. And so how can the state utilize its position to help support and incentivize local and regional action? And the way that we've identified is making sure that we're providing guidance, building capacity, addressing equity and social vulnerability, and that we're supporting and incentivizing smart and sustainable growth across the state. So some of the current actions that we're already doing, we're already looking at how to help municipalities understand and address resilience through planning. We're updating those plan endorsement requirements. There have been some trainings, specifically the floodplain manager trainings, to increase the number of local officials that are certified floodplain managers at the local level. And we continue to assist towns in examining and planning for climate change. So again, encourage you to, if there's other things that I didn't discuss, capture those in the Q&A. There's a number of things that we also can be doing and ideas that many of you have already contributed to on what else we can do to support local and regional action. So we're looking at, are there ways that we can expand the training and offering through something like a Climate Leadership Academy, where we're really working with local officials to build their understanding and capacity. We can provide more assistance, having on-the-ground assistance, similar to, if you're familiar with the CCI program that DEP runs for brownfields. We want to make sure that local municipalities have the appropriate authorities and that the state agencies have the appropriate authorities to expand their programs and respond directly to resilience. So if there are more regulatory changes that are needed in order to help facilitate stronger local and regional action, we want to make sure that we're including those. And if you have other ideas about how we can help towns, we're going to talk about funding as the last strategy. So we recognize that that'll be one that people will bring up. But if you have other more specific, we encourage you to enter those now. And I am going to turn it over to Tommy, who's going to go over the next 3 strategies.
Thanks, Jessica. Good morning. This is Tommy Cajado. The next strategy we have here is invest in nature. This strategy really highlights the importance of natural systems and their services to enhancing the state's resilience. Many natural ecosystems provide services to us that boost the state's resilience, a classic example being wetlands acting as a natural sponge to absorb storm surge, lessening the impact of flooding. We want to put forth actions that prioritize those services as resilient solutions, and also actions that protect the resilience of the ecosystems themselves so that they continue to provide those services. You know, the wetland that I mentioned earlier cannot buffer against storm surge if it's severely degraded. To organize this strategy, we've come up with 4 categories. The first being protect ecosystems and wildlife. That would include the various land management and protection programs in the state that contribute to resilience by promoting ecosystem health and stability. Prioritize nature-based solutions is the next. This discusses the importance of natural and nature-based solutions and how to expand their use as potential cost-effective resilience measures where appropriate. By nature-based solutions, I'm referring to things that take advantage of nature's functions to help address resilient solutions. Nature-based solutions can complement or act as alternatives to gray or hard infrastructure for projects such as stormwater management, flood attenuation, and shoreline stabilization. The third category, expand monitoring and adaptive management, underscores the importance of data in being able to understand how our natural systems are changing and adjusting our management practices to adapt to those changing conditions. As New Jersey's ecosystems respond to climate change and continue to change themselves, the best way for us to be prepared to make informed science-based decisions is to have really good data collected through expanded monitoring. Finally, reduce non-climate stressors is about reducing impacts that are not climate related on ecosystems to help give those ecosystems an edge in adapting to climate change. This shares some overlap with the first category, protect ecosystems and wildlife, as protecting ecosystems does, of course, reduce stressors on them. The state is already doing a lot to invest in nature through a variety of programs, some of which you see on the screen. For example, we at DEP conserve and manage land through a variety of programs, such as Green Acres. The Green Acres program protects open space as well as natural, historic, and cultural areas. By creating a system of interconnected open spaces, that program preserves and enhances New Jersey's natural environment and thus its resilience to climate change. I want to point out that this umbrella is where we think wildfire risk reduction efforts would fit in. Executive Order 89 specifically required that the state address wildfire risk in this climate change resilience strategy. The DEP's Forest Fire Service does things like conducts prescribed burns and manages state forests to that end. They're also developing new data-driven tools to help inform their management. We're developing and using a number of other tools to help us prioritize where we work and help us work more efficiently in the future as well. Some other ongoing actions the state is taking to invest in nature include recent upgrades to water protections for the first time in a decade, and multi-million-dollar investments in prevention and mitigation of harmful algal blooms or HABs, which we expect to be exacerbated by climate change. In terms of what we could do, there's a variety of things listed here. They really build off the current actions I highlighted on the previous slide, so I won't read all of them, but just pick a few. Right now, we have a number of ecosystem monitoring programs and want to expand our efforts so that we can keep up with changing environmental conditions, as I mentioned earlier. Using some new innovative approaches to monitoring could help us do that. For instance, drones are becoming increasingly popular tools for this type of work. We also know that citizen or community science volunteers could play a role here. Another way we could invest in nature for resilience is to explicitly consider future conditions in management and protection decisions. Even though there will always be some uncertainty in what future conditions will look like on the ground, we know that conditions on the ground will be different, and we could better integrate that into our protocols for decision making. Again, these are just examples to stimulate your thinking and should not be considered a comprehensive list. Like, we would love to hear some other options that folks have in the comment bar or in the survey afterwards. The next strategy that I'm going to talk about is promote coordinated governance. This topic is really about how state agencies will work together and with other levels of government to tackle climate change. We recognize that there needs to be a whole of government approach to address this issue. In other words, climate change affects everyone and everything, so no single entity can be effective on its own. We need to collaborate. The first category here is update organizations. With that, we're referring to things that will happen within state agencies, like how DEP did an internal reorganization in 2019 to shuffle staff and programs around to better focus on resilience planning. The bureau that myself and many of us in this webinar work within was created during that reorganization. The next two listed, improved data sharing and communications and community across agencies, would address ways to better collaborate across state agencies and with other levels of government, such as county, local, and federal. The fourth category, create seats at the table, speaks to our need to ensure that socially vulnerable populations are specifically included in our resilience efforts as a state. These populations are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and thus deserve to be at the table as we plan for the future. There has been a lot of coordination in the past 6 months around this effort to develop this climate change resilience strategy. For example, Nick mentioned earlier that the executive order established an interagency council on climate resilience, which has been active since late last year, having discussions about how to address the many challenges related to climate change for the state. Just the establishment of the council itself has done a lot to increase coordination and collaboration across the state agencies. There are a number of things happening within individual state agencies as well. For instance, the Department of Transportation has a fairly new resilience working group that meets to discuss resilience policy within their department. That sort of action we think would fall under the update organizations to prioritize resilience bullet. And if you know anything else that's happening, we would be happy to hear it. In terms of what the state could do, there are obviously many things that would allow government as a whole to deliver better outcomes on climate resilience for its residents. We know that we cannot do this alone and need to share responsibility with other levels of government, even with the success we've had thus far working across state agencies through the Interagency Council. A more concrete example would be that the state could establish some new process that calls for an interagency review of large projects, permits, or other activities, so that we can ensure that what we do as a state does not conflict with any of the individual agency resilience strategies, that we're always working towards a common goal and don't risk maladaptation. Regardless of what exactly we change to promote coordinated governance as a resilience strategy, we know that we need to evaluate opportunities to address environmental justice and take special consideration for social vulnerability in state actions. The final strategy I'm going to talk about is the funding and finance that Jessica mentioned earlier. Executive Order 89 required that we identify financing mechanisms, strategies, and opportunities for coordination to support climate resilience measures. So expand funding and finance explores innovative funding and finance mechanisms for resilience efforts. The purpose here is not to connect specific pots of money with specific projects or programs, or to be prescriptive about what those are, but rather to give an overview of some ways the state already does finance resilience related projects and how it could fund this type of work. To that end, the first category is increased funding opportunities. The next two provide low-cost financing options and expand the role of private capital. It really captures the reality that it will be very expensive to implement resilience projects and policies in the state, and that both the public and private sector have a stake in that and can share role and responsibility for finding the money needed to do that. The next, meet all needs equitably, speaks to the state's responsibility to ensure a resilient future for all New Jersey residents, not just those with means. Finally, protect state fiscal health will look to ensure that resilience investments do not leave the state in a fiscally vulnerable position. Right now, New Jersey has several public financing entities and initiatives and has been a national leader in this space historically. For example, the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank was the first program of its kind in the country when it was established in 1986. They're a independent state financing authority that provides low-cost financing for the construction of environmental and transportation infrastructure projects for things like enhancing water resources and facilitating responsible and sustainable economic development. The New Jersey Green Bank is a recent initiative that will be funded through revenue from the state's re-entry into the regional greenhouse gas initiatives, which is one of our primary climate mitigation efforts. The Green Bank will help drive money to improved energy efficiency and renewable energy use. And Executive Order 89 specifically calls for strategies that promote long-term energy and water security. So both of these institutions will help fill that need. And of course, we continue to rely on grants and funding from the federal government, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and FEMA in particular for some of our work, but there are many others. Fortunately, despite the heavy price tag for adapting to climate change, there are a lot of exciting new trends in funding and financing this kind of work. Other states and the federal government have started to encourage the use of private capital and impact investing to finance resilience investments. New Jersey could take advantage of these emerging opportunities as well. Opportunities like outcomes-based or pay-for-success contracting, as well as environmental impact bonds, have gotten a lot of attention in recent years and could be applicable in some cases in New Jersey. We view this portion of the strategy as being about identifying options to lessen the burden rather of public funding for resilience, and want to open it up to other areas such as philanthropy and the private sector. We would love to hear success stories from all of you about what has worked well in this space, be it in New Jersey or not, to see what we can adapt here. And with that, I will turn it over to Vanessa Dornish to discuss the Coastal Resilience Plan.
Hey everybody, my name is Vanessa Dornish and I work for the DEP Division of Coastal Engineering. The Coastal Resilience Plan is being approached as a part or a chapter of the larger climate change resilience strategy. Obviously, a lot of the climate change issues that face the coastal areas apply to the entire state, not just coastal communities. And so our approach is to include those broader climate change recommendations in the larger climate change resilience strategy. And that allows the Coastal Resilience Plan to focus on issues that are specific to sea level rise, storm surge, and overall protection and adaptation of water's edge areas. And that's more than just the ocean front. New Jersey's coastline is diverse, and we know that we need to recognize that. So we're talking about Back Bay areas, the Raritan Bay Shore, the Delaware Bay Shore, and our tidal rivers like the Hudson and the Delaware. This slide shows the overall structure of the Coastal Resilience Plan. It's split into 4 parts and an introduction. The introduction describes our approach to the plan, its purpose, and its structure. It also describes those diverse coastal regions that I mentioned, from the Hudson River area all the way down to the Delaware Bay Shore, and talks about how this diversity directs our approach to coastal resilience planning statewide. Part 1 describes climate change hazards that are specific to the coastal zone. And it also describes potential impacts to our coastal resources, be them natural, social, economic, or physical resources. Parts 2, 3, and 4 are where the actual strategies and recommended actions are outlined in the plan. Part 2 describes strategies for how New Jersey can facilitate planning for sea level rise at state, regional, and local levels. And it also talks about how the state can improve decision making through more equitable and ecological project prioritization. Part 3 describes the state's existing investments in coastal resilience projects, which was a requirement of the EO, and then it also recommends actions to improve the cost effectiveness and functionality of the projects that we use today and will continue to use in the future. Part 4 is different from the funding and finance section of the climate change resilience strategy that Tommy just described, in that here we're focusing on funding strategies specifically for coastal resilience projects, such as the New Jersey Shore Protection Fund. So we're looking at ways to maximize the sustainability of state spending for these projects by leveraging funding streams and sharing responsibilities with other public and private entities. So in the next few slides, we'll take a deeper dive into our approach to developing each of these strategy sections. So here you see an outline of all of the draft strategies in each section of the plan. There's 12 strategies currently, A through L, that you see here. In the next few slides, I'm going to elaborate on what each of these strategies is about. But first, I want to familiarize you with our overall approach to developing each strategy section so that you'll be able to better provide input in your area of expertise. So our approach to each strategy is depicted on the boxes on the right side of the slide. For each, we describe why the strategy is important to New Jersey's coastal resilience. We describe ongoing investments in the strategy, and these could be planning initiatives or adaptation projects or innovative funding efforts, depending on which strategy you're looking at. Note that per the executive order directing creation of this plan, we're not talking about just state investments, but all levels of government and non-governmental organizations as well. So if your group has done projects that fall under these strategies, we really want to make sure we include them. And so if you've done a resilience project, please get in touch with us in some way and let us know about it. Also, if you've done a project that doesn't fit under one of these strategies, then we're missing something and we want to know that too. So next, we describe challenges to implementing the strategies and projects, and these could be very broad challenges like funding, which is a challenge for almost every one of them, or a very specific challenge like elevating a historic structure. From those challenges, we propose recommended actions to address and overcome each challenge. And these recommendations are the backbone of the Coastal Resilience Plan. So now I'm going to briefly describe each strategy. And as I go through them, please remember to put any feedback or input you have into the chat. And then if you don't have anything right now, you can also get in touch with us later. So within the planning and governance section, we have strategy A, plan for future flooding, which is about improved planning for sea level rise at all levels of government. It also has a specific focus on how the state can assist local governments with planning for sea level rise, which was a requirement to be included in the plan per the executive order. Strategy B, make informed decisions, is about development and use of mapping tools tailored to coastal areas that can support coastal resilience decisions. It specifically focuses on 2 internal DEP decision support tools that are currently being developed to inform and support better state resilience decision making. Strategy C, ensure equitable actions, acknowledges that there's inherent equity challenges involved in climate change adaptation, and it focuses on addressing historic coastal resilience inequities and also ensuring that future resilience actions have equitable outcomes. Strategy D, prioritize nature-based solutions, recognizes the critical link between natural resources and the coastal communities they support. So that section is about facilitating the enhancement of natural systems in ways that build coastal resilience. Next are the project-based strategies. Strategy E, manage the oceanfront, focuses on managing beachfront erosion to support seasonal tourism and protect infrastructure, homes and businesses, and also habitats along our coastline. Strategy F, restore marshes and facilitate migration, recognizes that our coastal marshes provide multiple resilience benefits. And so it's about facilitating their adaptation through sea level rise, both through restoration and enhancement, and facilitating landward marsh migration over time. Strategy G, stabilize estuarine shorelines, focuses on prioritizing nature-based engineering solutions for shoreline stabilization, knowing that nature-based answers can both protect upland structures and provide ecological benefits. Strategy H, adapt infrastructure and buildings to increase flooding. It's about increasing the resilience of the built environment through a variety of adaptation methods, such as elevating or protecting structures and accommodating floodwater. Strategy I, move to safer areas, acknowledges that sea level rise will make it increasingly difficult for people to stay in the coastal places where they live and work today. So it's about laying the groundwork to facilitate a future managed retreat from some coastal areas in the future. For each of these strategies that focuses on projects, we're hoping to include a map in the plan that shows where existing projects have occurred. And again, that's not just state government projects, it's all efforts in New Jersey, and we really want to make sure we capture everyone's projects. So please provide your feedback. And then finally, we're going to look at the funding strategies for the Coastal Resilience Plan. Strategy J, reduce ongoing costs to the state, is about actions to reduce ongoing administration, operations, and maintenance costs for coastal resilience projects to ensure that state funds are being allocated as effectively as possible, acknowledging that in the future we'll need more projects, and so we want to make sure the ongoing costs of the projects we do don't eat up all the money we have. Strategy K, encourage private sector responsibility, is about facilitating private sector adaptation action and also specifically increasing insurance uptake to proactively address resilience and decrease the state's post-disaster funding obligations. Strategy L, expand and leverage funds, is about actions the state can take to leverage existing funding streams and also identifying new funding for coastal resilience projects. So here's the full draft list of strategies one more time. As I described, our approach in developing them follows the structure on the right. Please remember these are draft strategies and we need your input. So please give some thought about where your work fits in and where you might have recommended actions. And now I'll turn it back over to Nick.
Thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to everyone for bearing with us through this virtual session and our technology, learning the technology. I'll note again that the information that we presented here today is conceptual for consideration. We welcome and encourage your feedback. We're getting some really great comments and recommendations in the Q&A that we will certainly take back and consider and look at in as we further develop the strategy and the coastal resilience plan. I'll note again that there will be a survey posted on the department's climate change website very soon after the end of this information session. Similarly, the recording of this session will be also posted online as quickly as possible afterward. While you don't need to watch the webinar in order to complete the survey, I hope that you've seen that it does provide some important context that we think is important for you to know when you do so. We will also be sending out a link to everyone that registered for this information session. So that links you to the DEP website where the survey and this webinar will be posted. So I'm going to take a couple minutes just to answer, I think, some general questions and issues that have been coming in through the Q&A, and we do hope that that you keep submitting them. So we are coordinating and working with the state agencies on the Interagency Council. We have received information from every one of them that is being incorporated into the strategy, and we have, met with every one of them to discuss future opportunities for coordination, data sharing, and next steps. Excuse me. There is ongoing efforts and discussions, particularly at this point, on future mapping for flooding. That is, we have very good information for coastal flooding that will result from coastal storms and sea level rise. But we need a lot more work to improve our mapping for inland areas, particularly considering the increased and changing patterns of precipitation. So we are working across state agencies as well as with some of our academic partners to move those efforts forward. We will be looking to provide guidance for local governments as they begin to address these efforts themselves. There are multiple opportunities to do that through the state plan endorsement process. There are also ongoing projects and programs at state agencies, including DEP, where we are either funding or providing direct assistance to communities as they begin to address the impacts of climate change. Those are the primary general answers I wanted to provide at this point. And again, hope that you will take the time at the end of this session to provide your input through the survey. There is also an email listserv that you can find. That's climateresilience@dep.nj.gov. And we hope that you will subscribe to that listserv to receive further updates on activities and for the strategy and the coastal resilience plan, as well as another method for you to provide us feedback and recommendations. So with that, we will end the broadcast. Thank you again very much, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.